welcome to Grace this weekend. Thanks for being here with us. My name is Ryan, campus pastor of our campus here, our Akron East campus of Grace Church. And if this is maybe your first time here, I'd love to meet you, maybe hear how you kind of made your way to Grace, and maybe get your name and hear that story a little bit. But we started a series actually 2 weekends ago called Jesus Is, and man, I'm excited about this series. It's been a lot of fun, I think a really important one. And here's kind of what we have said around it is this. We said, Jesus, when we look at the person of Christ, there's a ton of fog and buildup around Jesus and his message, and a bunch of what he probably intended and really who he is has been fogged or clouded by like 2,000 years of culture and organizations and agendas that have attached themselves to Jesus. Not all of that is terrible or bad, but it's a reality that we live in today. If we're going to try to understand who Jesus is, what he's actually about, we have to make kind of an intentional decision to clear away some of that fog, remove some of the clutter and the buildup around Jesus and his message, and actually go back to the source and say, wait a minute, who's Jesus again? Let me try to see him with some fresh eyes, hear his message with fresh ears, and can I actually connect and see what Jesus came to the planet to do? Like, what was this whole thing about again? And so that's what we've been doing for the last handful of weeks. And if you've missed any of those messages, you can catch up online if you want. Subscribe to our YouTube channel or just kind of follow along there if you want to catch the last few. And along with that, we said we wanted to make an intentional effort and kind of focus in, kind of no matter where you have been, maybe if you're maybe investigating your faith or you've been following Jesus for a long time, we said, what if we just took this series, this 4 or 5 weekends, and actually read through the 4 accounts that show up in the Bible, the 4 books of the Bible that really describe the life of Jesus. All right, all of the Bible points to Christ as a person, but there's 4 books in particular that really break down his life and kind of tell his teaching, they capture his teaching. We call them the Gospels. And these books of the Bible were written by people that either spent time and lived life with Jesus, or they're really, really close to people that spent time or lived life with Jesus. So you're talking about people that are right there and could actually give some eyewitness testimony of who Jesus is and was and what he did and what he said. And of course, all of that is captured here in the Bible. And so we've been reading through these books, and we asked you to be in during this time, and a bunch of you said, hey man, we're in to do that. And if you're maybe just jumping in with us here and now, here's kind of what we said. We said, how about over the course of the 4 weeks, we read through these 4 books of the Bible. We watch a video that kind of helps you understand what each of those books of the Bible is about at a big picture level. And then, of course, kind of come to the series and continue to follow along with us. And so if you're just jumping in, maybe encourage you to make that decision to kind of finish it with us. If you've been along the ride with us and you've maybe been reading along, great job. If you've gotten behind a little bit, hey, it's okay. It happens to everybody. Just dust yourself off, right, and get back on the horse and keep reading if you want to jump in. So all the details are on our website, and we're going to be reading through the book of Luke this coming week. We read through the book of Matthew this last week, and I think it's fascinating to take the time and really see who Christ is. And so our big conversation starting really last week as we dove into Mark was looking at Jesus through the lens of Mark, right, kind of through his eyes, and he would kind of portray Jesus as the suffering servant, the one who would lay himself down, who would engage and embrace the ultimate suffering. And the scripture would say that because he did that, because he laid his life down for us, he was given the name above all names. And he kind of invites us to mimic and to model his life and his journey, and asks us to follow him as the suffering servant, that we should also kind of lay down our lives for the sake of love and for the sake of other people, and share, of course, in part of Jesus' reward in the future. That's the conversation last week. This week, we want to dive into a conversation as Matthew portrays Jesus from a slightly different angle. Matthew would have been one of Jesus' direct followers, right? So he literally saw Jesus' life. He's a tax collector. So he's a guy who would have been viewed as a sellout by his people. He would have been recruited by the Roman government to extract taxes from the Jewish people. He's a Jew himself, and so he would have been viewed like a sellout who, for basically financial gain, he took this job by the Roman government to take taxes from his own family and brothers and sisters and countrymen. So he would have been hated and despised, and he ended up on Jesus' inner circle, and he would kind of tell the story of Christ through the eyes of his experience, and he would paint Jesus and help us see Jesus through the lens of his Jewishness in part, and he would have painted him as this promised king that was promised so long ago in the Old Testament and continued to be promised all throughout the Old Testament. He would also present Jesus as kind of the new Moses. So Moses, if you're familiar with the story of Moses, right, the guy that split the Red Sea, God used him to do that. He would have been the guy that wrote the law, a big chunk of the Old Testament. And Jesus is now going to be the new Moses. He's the guy whose words and whose teaching is going to even supersede that of the original guy, Moses. And man, he's a big deal. And Matthew's going to help us start to understand the message of Jesus, which is going to be something that's a little bit hard to understand at first. When Jesus showed up, most of what he talked about is actually going to be something we may not always recognize or expect. He talked about the kingdom of heaven. If you read through these books of the Bible, you read along with us, you're going to hear that phrase all the time, the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. And when we hear, or at least when I hear the word kingdom, I tend to think of a geography, a place to go. Like there's a kingdom somewhere, and you would go there, and there'd be a king and a queen, and there'd be a crown where the guy would sit on a throne. Like that's the picture in my mind. That's not exactly what Jesus has in mind when he uses the word kingdom. In essence, what he's saying is this. He's saying, I came to bring a rule and a reign. That's really what the word kingdom means. I came and I'm bringing in this reign and this rule that I'm offering and inviting people into. And this kingdom is here. It's available. You can enter into it now. Is kind of how he would talk about it. And so in many ways, he would talk and describe the kingdom and talk about people entering in to his kingdom, his rule and reign, and kind of coming under his authority. That's the idea. It's a lot of what Jesus did. He described his authority, his kingdom, his rule, his reign, and talked about how entering into it happens and what it means to be under this umbrella. And listen, I just realized, even as I kind of use the word authority, that we as people tend to kind of bristle at that. Right? When we hear, I have to come under someone else's authority, that feels a little bit scary, and probably there's some reason for that. Right? There's a tendency in us to not want to be under someone else's rule and reign. I want to be under my own rule in my own reign. I don't want to follow someone. I want to lead someone. I want to be the person in charge. And some of that is okay, and some of that maybe is unhealthy. But probably for a lot of us, that initial knee-jerk reaction of I'm kicking against authority is probably from some version of an unhealthy experience where we trusted somebody. We came under their leadership. We went with it. We went under their rule or their reign, right? A coach or a person or somebody in our life. And as we put ourselves under that authority, we were hurt by it. We found a situation that was not quite right, and it caused us to kind of shrink back or pull back a little bit. Some of those situations are super painful. Some of them are not. They're just kind of goofy. I think of when I first got my first job in high school. I was 14, something like that. And I just wanted some money for pizza and like to save for a car, So I'm like, it was my first step into the working world. And I'm like, man, I should just like get a job. My stepdad goes, hey, there's like this landscaping place, like right down the street here at the end of the road. And he's like, you could get that job and work out, you get a good workout and get a good tan. And I was like, this is a great idea. I think this is what I should do. I was like 115 pounds, 5'7", so I rode my little bike down there, 14, got my resume made, right? And I show up and I'm interviewing for my first job. And I show up and I give the guy the resume, and he's basically like, cool. Can you show up at 7 tomorrow? And I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea. Like, we're going to see how this shows up. And I'm like, hey, man, I want to work like 15 to 20 hours a week, right? I just want a little bit of cash in my pocket. That's it. He's like, great, no problem. Show up tomorrow at 7. I was like, here we go. Got my first job. Easier than I thought it was. So I ride my bike there early in the morning. I can't remember, 6 or 7, right? I show up, and I'm thinking, I'm going to work probably like a 5-hour shift. Because I'm working 15 to 20 hours a week, and I'm going to work probably multiple days. This is how this thing's going to play out. And there was no instruction given, nor did I ask any questions whatsoever. He said, like, be here at this time. I was like, okay, I rode away, right? So I'm on my way there. I have absolutely nothing with me, right? I have no lunch. I have no sunscreen. I have nothing with me, and I start working a handful of hours, and I'm good. I'm good for a while. I'm digging, right, and I'm okay. And then it starts to get like close to lunchtime. I'm like, this shift's about over. I mean, I've been here for like 5 hours. We're gonna wrap this up. We'll go home and get some lunch. Good to go. And it's lunchtime, and I'm like, I have no lunch, and he's not taking me home yet, so I can ride my bike back to my house to get lunch. And what do I do? And so I'm working with a guy who didn't speak English, and he just like looked at me and like handed me the sandwich. I was like, thank you, because I didn't know how to say it in another language. And I ate my lunch, my little bit of lunch that was left, and he worked me that 12 hours that first day. I'm a little bit pale. I don't know if you noticed, but I was completely sunburnt. Every muscle in my body was destroyed. He had me get under those like commercial wheelbarrows that are super deep. He's like, go stand at the back of that truck and we're gonna put gravel in it. And I was like, okay. And he dumped the whole thing so high, and I was like, I'm gonna spill it, and this man's going to kill me, right? Because he just yelled at me the entire day. It was great. And I was super exhausted, right? Never worked this hard in my life. And we were leaning down in this pond, and I'm like holding myself up with one hand and working, right? Moving rocks with the other one. And he's like, hey, boy. Talk just like that. Hey, boy, I hired you because you got 2 hands. I was like, I'm sorry, I'll do the things, And it was really fantastic. So the next day, he's like, show up again at 7. And I worked 12 hours that next day. And I was like, I'm going to die, right? This man's going to kill me. I've surpassed my hours in 2 days. It's just supposed to be for a week. And I worked at that job for 2 weeks, right? And I was like, that was my first job. It's amazing that I continued to work, right? But I trusted this guy, right? In a situation, I'm like, sure, he's going to take care of me. He has my best interest in mind. He'll tell me when I should bring food to something. He'll tell me when I can go home, or he'll give no help at all, right? And he's not a terrible guy. It's just a situation, right? But you and I have all had situations like that where we went in and we trusted somebody. We went for it. We went all in on it, and we got burned. And now there's a temptation to pull back and be suspicious, and probably that's healthy in a fallen, broken world to have that response. But we need to know it about ourselves, because when I'm looking at coming under the leadership of someone else, I have some baggage with that, and so, right, we all do. And it becomes really, really important, because at the core of the message of Jesus is an invitation to come under someone's leadership, to enter into and to come under someone's rule and reign. Right? So I need to recognize that that's what's happening. Now, as Jesus invites us into this in the book of Matthew, and of course all throughout these books of the Bible, what's going to happen is it's going to not be very clear to the people he's talking about what this kingdom is like, or even the fact that he's a king. Jesus is very much hidden in plain sight as the king. That people don't understand, they don't recognize who he is, what kind of power and authority he actually wields and what he could really do for them if they would follow him. So every once in a while, Jesus will kind of let people in to a degree of his authority and show them kind of what he is capable of and show them who he is. I'm going to go ahead and turn here to Matthew chapter 17, verses 1 through 10. If you have a Bible with you, maybe go ahead and open that. Maybe if you've got your a phone, you can download YouVersion. If you don't have the Bible on your phone, totally do that. Download that app, and you can follow along there as well. Matthew 17, here's what Jesus is going to do. He's going to, as you're turning there, I'll kind of describe this. He's going to show his disciples who he is, and he's been doing this in progressively greater fashion as he has lived. So he has demonstrated to his disciples and to other people that he has authority over the weather, over the wind and the waves, and he's able to still them. He has authority over sickness and disease. He has authority over the religious leaders. He even said that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. Like he's the one who is the fulfillment of the law. He's got all this crazy authority. He even has authority over death. Like he raised people from the dead when he was here on the planet. And so they get these glimpses of who Jesus is, but nobody can quite put it together, including his closest inner circle, which he had 3 guys who would be in the inner circle. There's the 12, but then there'd also be like the 3 that would be within that 12, and they would see some special things that Jesus would reveal to them or experience with them. And here's one of those experiences. Here's Matthew 17. Starting in verse 1, it says this: After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John. There's the 3. The brother of James, and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. You can imagine the situation. You're with Jesus. You know something special is going to happen because he's just got a few people. They're climbing up onto this mountain. What's going to happen here? How is this going to roll? Verse 2, it says, there he was transfigured before them. Boy, what a simple sentence. He was transfigured before them. What does that mean? It describes it more. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said, don't be afraid. But when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man, that's him, has been raised from the dead. Right? You imagine this story. Peter and James and John are standing with Jesus, and right there, all of a sudden, he's changed. The Bible uses transfigured. His face is glowing, shining like the sun. Right? He's brilliant. His skin is brilliant as light, and all of a sudden they're blown away that, wow, Jesus is not just a guy that does some cool tricks and has some great teaching. Something's going on here. And I love that this is captured in the story. Peter immediately just like blurts something out, right? You ever know a nervous talker? Are you a nervous talker? Right? When you're in a nervous situation, you're a little bit scared, not sure what to happen, you just start saying things. This is what Peter does. Peter sees Jesus transformed in front of him, and he's like, hey, how about I build some tents? Right? Like one for you and one for me. And God basically has to show up and say, hey, be quiet. Listen to him. He's the guy in charge. Peter, shut up for a minute. And he's like, okay. And they're terrified, right? They fall down to the ground. And all of this happens in a handful of moments here. It seems like it's really fast. But Peter and James John, they walk away with this mind-blowing experience. Wow, this guy is the real deal. He's the king. He is, and eventually they were saying that he is God, right? God the Father would say, listen, this is my son, he's the one I love, with him I'm well pleased. And they're mind blown. And then Jesus does something that he does often throughout his teaching and his miracles. He's like, hey, don't tell anybody yet about this. Like, no one's ready for this thing. And if people understand, they hear who I actually am, they're going to misinterpret and they're going to misunderstand my kingdom. They're going to think I'm here to take the Romans over and make everybody's dreams come true. That's not actually what I'm doing. I'm bringing a different kind of kingdom, a different kind of rule and reign to bear. And Jesus, what he's going to do all throughout his teaching, especially in Matthew, is he's going to talk about the nature of what this rule and reign is like, what his kingdom is like. So often he's going to talk about the kingdom, and he's going to use stories or little short things called parables, and he's going to describe what this kingdom he's talking about is like. And here's some things he would say about his kingdom. In essence, he would say, it's not a kingdom that you're going to just see one day. It's invisible. The rule and reign that I have, you're not going to see it here on earth. It's going to be something that starts really small. He's going to say like a mustard seed, right? Like a little tiny seed that is the smallest of seeds, but when it's planted and it grows, it becomes the largest tree that everyone can have shade in. And the idea is this thing starts small and it's going to grow and explode and be absolutely massive over time. And that's exactly what happens. The movement of Jesus started with just a handful of people in an isolated geography, right? In Israel, in Jerusalem. Israel's the size of New Jersey, right? Just a little pocket, little window, only working with a handful of people. Mostly he's rejected and misunderstood. And even after he raises from the dead, there's only 100 people left that are waiting for him to do anything or continue to be committed to the movement. It starts super small. 2,000 years later, it's the most influential global movement known to man. People from all over the planet would claim Jesus and his power and his message as the reason for their transformation and for their hope on the planet. The Bible is going to be the best-selling book of all time. This thing is huge, and it's not even done yet. It's absolutely how it played out. This kingdom, the rule and the reign that only a few people entered into would start super small and become this massive, massive thing. So something else that he would say about his kingdom is this, that it's upside down. That it's upside down. That the normal way that things tend to work, that people rule, we talked about this some last week, that people tend to rule and those rulers are the greatest. He says, in my kingdom, it's flipped. The last will be first. The greatest will be the servant. If you want to be the greatest in the kingdom, you have to become like the one who's young and teachable and believing, not like the one who is older and knows it all. You have to have humility to enter into my kingdom. And he's going to say, in essence, a lot of situations that look like someone is on the top is actually someone being on the bottom, and people on the bottom are going to end up on the top. It's an upside-down kingdom. The whole power structure is flipped. Why? Because this is a movement in a kingdom and a rule and a reign that is marked by mercy and by the justice of God, right? And so people that would be discarded by the other kingdoms, people that would have been thrown away, people that would have been discardable, would now be people that would have dignity in the kingdom of Jesus. And people who would be seen as people who were something would not be treated with any more respect than the person who's treated with nothing. There's mercy offered. People who have blown it can have another chance. It's going to be marked by mercy, and it's going to be marked by justice. Hey, here's another one. It's going to be of immeasurable value. Immeasurable value. Jesus is going to talk about his kingdom like this. Hey, he's going to say, in essence, it's like if somebody came across a piece of land And while looking at it, they discover this unbelievable jewel, this treasure that's on that land. They're going to sell absolutely everything that they have to go get that piece of land. Man, if you found out there's $1 billion on that piece of property, wouldn't you sell your house to go get that property? Sure you would. He's saying that's what the kingdom's like. It's so important. It matters so much. Its value is so high that a person that's considering entering into it would say, in essence, I would leave absolutely everything if I could gain the kingdom. There's nothing that's more important to me than that. It holds the absolute highest value in my heart and in my mind to be under the rule and the reign of Jesus. One of the harder things to understand about Jesus' kingdom is this, that it's kind of here and it's kind of not. It's already here. In one sense, we already have access to it. Can I enter into the kingdom of Jesus right here, right now? Yes. How would I do that? Say, Ryan, I'm not leaving anywhere. I didn't go anywhere, right? You don't have to leave. The kingdom is available to anyone at any time who lives on planet Earth. I can say, Jesus, I want to be a part of your kingdom. I want to enter under your authority, your rule and reign. That's a decision to be made by humility as I accept what Jesus is offering and I recognize his sacrifice for my sins. In one very real sense, the kingdom is already here. On the other hand, the kingdom is not yet here. What do you mean by that? Well, I can access it today, I can enter into it today, but one day this kingdom is going to be a physical kingdom like you and I would think of one naturally. One day Jesus is going to rule and reign on earth. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. And this, marked by mercy and justice, will be the actual functionality of everything that exists. We're going to be able to see the value of the kingdom, not by faith, but by sight. Every wrong will be righted and everything will be adjusted according to mercy and justice. And we're going to see that the thing that started small ultimately would end the way that Jesus talked about it as the grand summary of this whole thing that we're living out. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to be wonderful. It surpasses my highest imagination. Positive of that. This is what the kingdom's like. And much, much more. But this is the starting point. And what Jesus, when he's on the planet, was saying is, I want you to know that I am here so that you can know that this kingdom exists even though you can't see it. I'm here so that you understand that I'm inviting you into it. I didn't come here to condemn you. I came here to love you and to invite you into my leadership, into my rule, into my reign. Why? Because that leadership is the safest, most healthy place that we could ever find ourselves. In fact, it's the only kingdom that I could look at you and say, I guarantee you this will never fail. If you're a student of history, you'll look back and the finest, most expansive kingdoms of the planet have failed. One of the most impactful things that has ever happened to me is I was in ancient Israel and I was walking through unbelievable, mind-boggling ruins of what was once a kingdom. And I'm positive that those people who lived in that day, in that time, in that ancient grandeur, thought to themselves, nothing will ever destroy this. This will always be this way. And the reality is, it fell. And my kingdom would fall, and your kingdom would fall, and Greece fell, and Rome fell, and one day, the United States of America will fall. It's not doomsday. It's just the nature of what happens. And there is a kingdom that will never fail. There is a king who is always good, who will never leave, who will never forsake, who will always judge justly, who will lead by example, who will sacrifice the most deeply, who will see the value of the unvaluable in the rejected, who will square off with the bully in the pride of man. There's a kingdom that's available, and it is here, and it is now, and it's not yet. This is what Jesus was saying in Matthew. Right? This is what Matthew's showing us. He's showing us that this message right here is the thing that matters. And if I'm going to know Jesus, if I'm going to know the King, I got to know the kingdom, because those things are attached to one another. If I can't, there's no world that exists where I could accept the King and reject the kingdom. So Jesus, as he shows up on the planet, is bringing this leadership. And in essence, he's going to say this: I want you to join into it. And I want you to help other people join into it and understand the value of that invitation. And I want my kingdom to expand. At the end of the book of Matthew, we find Jesus raised from the dead. Right? And the last thing he's going to say in the book of Matthew is, in essence, this: I want you to go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them, right, in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've ever commanded you. Here's the idea: is I'm helping you to become a disciple. I'm helping you to enter the kingdom. That is the job and the mission of a follower of Jesus. Wait a minute, I thought the mission and the job of a follower of Jesus was to make sure our culture stayed the same. I thought the mission and the job of a follower of Jesus was to make sure a political party stayed in power or God in power. I thought the mission of a follower of Jesus is that we wear T-shirts and support a side business. I thought the mission of a follower of Jesus is that we're judgmental and rude and hypocritical. The mission of Jesus is to make disciples and to help people enter the kingdom of God. That's what it's about. I miss it. We miss it. It's cloudy. I want to get rid of the cloud and the fog and just see this. This is the mission. This is the job. And you say, Ryan, this is difficult because there's other kingdoms at bay. And when I tell this person about this kingdom, this person might be upset with me, right? Right. That's exactly what would happen. In fact, what Jesus told us would happen, he said in the book of John, which we're not to yet, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. And he also said this: blessed are you when people persecute you and mock you and ostracize you because of my name's sake. Rejoice and jump for joy, because great is your treasure in heaven. When that happens. When I go to live the life of the kingdom, when I live under the rule and the reign of Jesus, and I help other people to find that rule and reign, I'm going to face persecution. My loyalty to the King is going to be tested. And he says, hey, listen, when that happens, don't worry. We'll square that all up in the end. Don't worry. I know the injustice that's taking place. I'll make good on that. Don't worry. So what do we do with all this? Massive conversation. Here's the thing. The deep question that Matthew is pressing us into is this: what kingdom do I want to live under? And specifically, do I want to enter and to live under the kingdom of Christ? Is that where I want to be? Is that what I believe? Do I believe in some other message or some other kingdom or some other king? Or do I believe in the message of Jesus and his rule and reign. His rule and reign, not just in theoretical church conversations, his rule and reign when I'm surfing social media, his rule and reign when I'm making romantic relationship decisions, his rule and reign when I'm at the party, his rule and reign when I'm doing my taxes. Is Jesus my king, and do I want him to be my king? Or is there another king or kingdom that I've attached myself to? That's the question. And hear me. If you're hearing this properly, you should feel the radical nature of what Jesus is saying. And you might say to me, Ryan, like, to really go all in on the Jesus thing is scary for me. It feels like I'm putting myself out there because you don't know how I've been hurt when I've trusted other people and put myself under their authority. I hear you. You have people that have failed you in your life. I just know that's true. I don't know what it is in many cases. Parents or coaches or bosses, governments. I don't know what it looks like. But you have put yourself under the authority of someone. Maybe it's your own authority. And people have failed you, or I know you've failed yourself. Done that plenty. It's part of what drove me ultimately to this decision in my life. Is I would look and say, there's no other kingdom that I want to live in. There's no rule, there's no reign, there's no leadership that I could trust or put my faith in that I would be more sure and confident in than in the leadership of Jesus. This has got to be so much more than a church conversation or a social movement or a political agenda it's got to come all the way down to my life and my heart and my mind and what do I do with Jesus? Is he king or not? Because people that are transfigured and say, enter into my kingdom, if that person's just a man, a teacher, that's not just a man or teacher, that's a cult leader. That's weird. If this is just a guy that showed up on the planet that could do some cool tricks, and he says, enter into my leadership, I'm out. If he's actually who he says he is, and he can actually do and create what he says he can do and create, then the decision is, do I believe that or not? And that decision of loyalty to Jesus and his kingdom is something that plays out in all of our life, not just a one-time decision. I want to live under the reign and the rule of Jesus. That's the question. Is that when I hear about Jesus, is that what I'm hearing? The question that Matthew would be asking us today. That Jesus is king. Guys, as the band comes out, I'd love us to wrestle with this, to wrestle it through, to ask the deep questions, to let Christ kind of into our hearts and minds and wrestle the question of authority. Would you pray with me? Father, I want to just recognize the wonder of the things that you have said through Christ here on the planet. Or as you've opened up and shown us what your kingdom looks like, even just a little glimpse. Lord, that causes me to confess and to own that I have trusted in and believed in false kingdoms and unreliable kingdoms and my own kingdom. And Lord, I don't want any part of it. Forgive me, God, for my disloyalty to you and your kingdom. I want in. I want to live under your rule and reign in real, practical ways that are radical for those of us on the planet today. God, I pray that you give us courage. Courage to hear your words fresh, to hear your invitation fresh, that you're offering to be our King. And that's all because of your great love for us. Lord, would you speak to our hearts and our minds this morning as we sing and worship you?